Hey, this is Alex from Los Angeles.
And this is Karan from San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us, a journey of self-discovery through a shared love of film. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important movies, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite films. We hope these movies and topics are fun and revelatory to you, just like they've been to us. So with that, Alex, what's our episode for today?
So our episode topic for today is movies that shaped our sense of humor. Now it is April, and we were thinking of what does April bring in terms of holidays or notable days, and April Fool's Day came to mind as what we think of when we think of April, and that led us to comedy. So what we're going to be doing today is talking through the comedy movies that kind of shaped this sense of humor for us. And it was interesting to me, like thinking about this, and then I'd love to hear kind of how you approached it, just in kind of realizing that comedy and humor is such a subjective and personal thing. Like it really does speak to what you find funny is very different from what other people find funny, and what you find funny is very important to you too. Like humor can play such a big part in your life and in many stages of your life, whether it's you're already happy and it makes you happier, or you're in a bad mood and you just want something to lift your spirits a little bit. And it was actually, I found this episode to be the most enjoyable because I got to watch movies that I found really funny, go back and rewatch them. I actually haven't done a lot of comedy watching in the last couple of years, just with a lot of things going on and just not really much in the mood for it. So some of these films that I had watched dozens of times growing up, I just been on the shelf for a long time. So it was really fun for me to kind of like get into a better mood and watch them again and laugh, and just shows me how important like laughter is to what life is. But yeah, the biggest thing for me was that subjectivity piece. What about you? Like, how did you think about it, or think about humor in general?
Yeah, no, totally in the subjectivity part. And I think this will be very apparent from our lists, and it's indicative of who we are as people, which is, the fun part of doing this podcast, obviously. I guess, my framework was really peeling the layers of what is my sense of humor in general. And I'd love to hear yours as well. And how does that map to the movies? So my sense of humor is, a little bit dry, a little bit self-deprecating, but it's very much rooted in the real life. Like I don't really have a big sense around, oh, this is a big gag moment. Those happen, and those are laugh out loud funny, or can be. But I've always been of the opinion that humor is kind of woven in your life in the day to day. You don't have to really step out of it. You can if you want to. So that's sort of one thing, and I think that's reflective in the movies that I picked as well. And then last thing I'd say is that from a film standpoint, for me, it's been very important that no matter how funny a movie might be, it has to be rooted in truth. I don't respond very well to set pieces specifically to get a laugh. Sort of, a bunch of guys writing a bunch of funny lines. I can sort of see the writing room when I watch a movie like that, and you'll see me just sitting there with my arms folded, which is probably not great. But for me, it has to be rooted in reality and truth. And so, what about you? How would you describe your sense of humor?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I definitely like very dumb and goofy humor, but at the same time, I feel that you can do dumb things and have very, very silly and irreverent jokes, but they can also say something and make comments, whether it's political comments or satire on life, or that there's sort of a point to the humor. And that point to me also is important, that is rooted in some like positive or good heartedness. Like a lot of mean humor, I don't really respond very well to. To me, it's very important in the structure of the joke, like who is being made fun of or being called out, or what is being called out and made fun of, is really important to me in terms of how my humor developed. But definitely, like it's a lot for me around like dialogue, very much around written sort of jokes, and that being more important than, let's say, a visual comedic element. though those can be funny, but for me, it's a lot more about that. And it was very fascinating, actually, going back to these movies for me, because I kind of started with like, what do I find funny today? And why do I have certain types of comedy I gravitate towards and not? And I kind of traced it back to the 3 films we're about to talk about. And it really did have a very meaningful impact on me. I mean, now whether I was funny in these ways and these films reflected that, or they actually shaped where my comedy came from, like, I don't really know, but these are definitely the genesis of the different types of humor that I find very funny still to this day.
That's the other important thing. And I'm sure we'll get into that towards the end of the podcast. That are these movies still funny today or no? And I think in a lot of other episodes that we've had, because we're telling a chronological story often of our development as people, we both have picked movies that we probably don't like that much today, but they're still important as part of kind of whatever theme we are following. I think this was the hardest episode for me to actually put a movie that I found funny at a certain point in time, but I don't find it funny anymore. I couldn't put that because I think there's something about the connection and relationship you have towards humor that if something is not funny now, it doesn't matter to me if it was funny to be, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's not funny anymore. I can't put that on the list. So this was a little tricky in that sense.
No, totally. That's true. I mean, there definitely were films that didn't make the list that did shape me at various times, but I don't necessarily go back to or might not find as funny as I did when I first saw it. But the 3 films that I have, like, again, going back and watching these, some of these I actually watch more than once because I'm like, man, it feels good to laugh, and then watch it like 3 times in a row. Back like what I used to do as a kid. But I still, laugh at every single one of these, and maybe even more so than I did when I first saw them. So maybe with that, we can start jumping into the list. So why don't you start with your number 3 movie that shaped your sense of humor?
All right. So my number 3 is this movie called To Be or Not to Be from 1942, directed by Ernst Lubitsch, starring Carol Lombard, Jack Benny, Robert Stack. And the quick IMDb logline on this is: during the Nazi occupation of Poland, an acting troupe becomes embroiled in a Polish soldier's efforts to track down a German spy. The logline actually doesn't sound humorous at all. And I'll maybe speak a little bit about how I even came to this movie. I had watched other movies that Lubitsch had done, Heaven Can Wait, Shop Around the Corner and such in the last like 10 years. And then I knew this was a movie that was, well revered and talked about, but I came to it pretty late in life and it kind of blew me away. I'm actually not a big satire or gimmick person. Like I said, I find those movies interesting, but not funny. This movie is a farce. But I think why this is on the list for me is because I think it really highlights the power of laughter in bad times, and that bad times can also be funny. It's how life is. I have so many moments of, in sickness or what have you, sitting outside, I don't know, an operation ward at the hospital when a family member is in there and you're sitting outside with another family member, and through the tears and the tiredness, somebody does something stupid, like, I don't know, say something funny or farts or whatever, and you just crack up. That is the power of laughter, that it can sort of seep itself anywhere. And I think this movie does a great job of doing that. And I think the key to it is that the farce is rooted in reality. I don't think anybody else but Lubitsch, who's famous for his light touch, can actually make this movie work, at least for me. Otherwise, this will become very heavy-handed, or maybe too preachy, or maybe too sappy, or maybe too whatever. But it's sort of this delicate dance between, on one hand, you're feeling bad about all the stuff that's happening, but then you're also laughing the other moment. And I think the key to that is the bad people are also part of the buffoonery. They are also silly and kind of human in their own way. And it's not to sort of make them endearing, like it's very clear who's in the wrong, but there's sort of this light touch and sort of tightrope walk that he does with all these characters. So I don't know, I just find that more than laugh out loud funny, but just charming and just so clever and fun. I think the cast is a big part of this. Carol Lombard is just incredible. I haven't seen that many movies of her, maybe a few. I clearly need to kind of do a full binge on her, but she's electric. Brilliant comedic timing. And again, with a lot of these movies that I have on my list, you'll notice that it is about the individual people who are funny, but to me, it's more about ensemble pieces and how people are reacting and being funny with each other. So, you have these two distinct worlds of the Jews and the Nazis. They are buffoons in their own ways. You bring them together. What happens when they are brought together in this weird farce of there being a lookalike to Hitler and there being this sort of drama company behind it? So again, a brilliant kind of storytelling device. You could say that this is Hollywood kind of, patting themselves on the back around, art is important or what have you. But I actually do believe in that. And maybe that's why this movie works on me, that art is important and it matters even in the bad times. And at times it can save us from the worst of things. So there's a little bit of that message if you want to take it. But if not, you can just have a good time in a bad time, which is, I think, amazing about this movie. It's been on my repeat watch list. I've seen it several times. So yeah, that's my number 3, To Be or Not to Be.
Yeah, so I had never seen this movie or actually heard of this movie before that you put on this list. And I was very pleasantly surprised. You said laugh out loud at some point in what you were saying. And I literally, the first 20 minutes of this movie are hilarious. Like I was literally laughing out loud. So many of those gags in the beginning. I mean, Hitler jokes are always funny.
Yes.
That line when they're doing like the Zig Heil and it's this joke of like just repeating how goofy that whole Nazi salute is. And then the Hitler, so like Zig Heil, hail Hitler. And the Hitler's guy's like, hail myself. I literally laughed for like 5 minutes at that. But then when I looked and like, wow, this movie was made like during World War II. Like Hitler was still alive.
Yep.
They're actually poking fun at the Nazis, which must have been very ballsy and very hard as an audience member at the time to even see that. It's like, oh, people over there, right, in the war that are getting killed by what Hitler's army is doing, and yet you still are able to laugh at him and the goofiness of Hitler. It kind of reminded me a lot of the Looney Tunes cartoons at the time too. We're doing a lot of the mocking of Hitler and the enemies of the United States, and that just immediately like pulled me in. I thought the dialogue was really sharp, which is something that I also like, a lot of dialogue driven humor. It reminded me a lot too of a sitcom as well, like the mix up with the there's like a plot thread of the Nazi spy, and then there's also this love triangle comedy bit with the wife and the husband and this other guy who's trying to court the wife. It felt a lot like I was watching some I Love Lucy or something in a good way. I was like, wow, maybe that's where this comes from. The whole thing also reminded me a lot of like Mel Brooks too, which then I went to find that he remade this movie, or he was in a remake of it in the 80s. I'm like, oh, now I kind of get where a lot of his comedic sensibilities came from. So yeah, I mean, I felt the film, the beginning of it was a lot funnier than when it turned into more like a conventional spy kind of espionage thriller. But yeah, overall, I would recommend this movie. I mean, I found it, again, I laughed out loud. And I love that too, when you can find movies from the old time, like this is made in 42, right? And that it's still that funny, which is something I love about humor as well. Like it's something that doesn't always date itself. Like something that might have been funny 100 years ago can still be funny now if it's done in the right way by real comedic artists. And this movie really helped remind me of that. Of like, yeah, like it's not any time you can make a funny movie. So I thought this was great. I really enjoyed it.
I'm so glad. Yeah. I mean, I would say as the movie goes on, even then the buffoonery continues. Like that whole scene when you're worried that the guy who's pretending might get found out with the fake mustache.
Oh yeah. The fake Hitler.
That whole sequence is just so incredible and so clever. But then again, sort of going back to the light touch. On one hand, you are biting your nails, is going to get caught. Then the other hand, you're like, oh my gosh, Christ is awarded. This is great. And then of course they make the wrong move because the guys show up there to save him, and we're sort of back to square one.
Yeah.
So the high stakes in that 10-minute time period is just so amazing and done in such a funny way. Yeah, I forgot to mention about the fact that this was made and screened when the actual war was on.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine like the optics of that, the impact that must have had on people. And it's truly kind of going back to my point of laughter being this drug in the bad times. This movie is literally that, because it was made in that time.
Yeah.
And it continues to kind of, give more and more. You can, swap the bad times from Nazi times to whatever times you want. But it makes this movie a little bit more weighty because it was made when this was happening.
Yeah, which I think speaks to the power of comedy too, that you can kind of do that kind of thing and maybe say some things because you're using comedy when at a time when Hitler was still a major, evil in the world who was wreaking all this havoc. And yet here this movie comes out where, again, there's Hitler jokes in the first 5 minutes. And I was like, this is hilarious. And then when I looked it up, I was like, wow, literally during the war. And that is something that is so, I don't want to say it's easier to make Nazi jokes now, but you can make fun of Hitler and it doesn't pack the same weight because he's dead. And it's been, decades. So it just shows how bold this movie must have landed. I mean, it's very funny. Definitely recommend it.
And again, it's sort of very light. I think that's sort of the brilliance of this movie could have in anyone else's hands would just come off as, I don't know, something else. And we'll probably get to in our honorable mentions, other movies and other filmmakers who have done satires or whatever and can push it a little bit too much in one direction, at least for me. But anyway, what is your number 3?
Cool. So my number 3 movie that shaped my sense of humor is 1989's UHF. So this is a film directed by Jay Levy, starring Weird Al Yankovic, Victoria Jackson, Michael Richards, and Fran Drescher. And the IMDb plot is an unemployed visionary becomes the manager of a local television station. The station becomes a success with all sorts of hilarious sight gags and wacky humor. So this is a vehicle for Weird Al Yankovic, who is a artist, recording artist, also comedian. He does song parodies as well as other funny songs that he writes himself. And I first saw this movie on VHS in the early 90s. I'd already known about Weird Al at the time and actually didn't even know he had a movie. As a young kid growing up in the late 80s, especially as a boy, Weird Al was definitely a big influence over, kids on the schoolyard, everyone talking about Weird Al Yankovic. He definitely spoke to kids a lot in terms of his nature of humor. And for me, the reason why this film, as I was looking back over my sense of humor now and, where I can trace it back to, the fact that this humor in this film is very good-natured, coming from a good place, but then also still like punching up essentially at the bad guys in this film, who are like the last film you talked about, are also portrayed as goofy and funny. But the expenses are never taken at the jokes are never at the expense of the main characters.
Right.
But there's also a very this movie's really dumb, very goofy. There's a very fine line between stupid and clever, and I think Weird Al walks that line in his music, and then definitely in this film too. There's a lot of big sight gags of at this TV station that they're at. There's a lot of satires and parodies of different types of TV shows that they're now putting on. Movie parodies. I mean, there's definitely that Weird Al parody flavor in this. But again, all the humor for me was always something that was very good-hearted, which is important to my sense of humor. There's also a lot of very good quotable lines in it, which is something too that for me, as I looked over my humor, the type of humor that I identify with was a lot of these cult humor where there's a cult forming around a personality or a particular film where you can quote those lines and it's kind of like you're on the inside, like the inside jokes because you can quote these lines from UHF and you can talk to other Weird Al fans and talk about your favorite bits. So there's this social aspect of connecting with other fans But because this movie too was notoriously a big box office bomb, it was not looked upon as popular at the time, that it sort of made it a little bit irreverent too. Like, oh, I'm cool. Like I like UHF and got it. I got the humor, and who else got it with me? So there was definitely a lot of sense of that too, where a lot of my humor comes from not more like giant mainstream comedic stars or comedic films that were very popular in the States at the time. There was always some little edge to it. And that edge was that cult element of it. Which I think this movie exemplifies really well. Yeah, I mean, this movie, just again, I watched it I think twice in preparation for this. It's been a long time since I've seen it. Oh, also too, I think, you know, with the musical element of it, there's a couple, there's one musical parody sequence. It made me realize too that is also a very big part of my sense of humor. I gravitate towards movies or shows where music comedy is a big part of what it's trying to do. You know, South Park always has, which is a show I like, a lot of musical elements in it. Their films, the Trey Parker, Matt Stone, who did South Park, the South Park movie is a musical. Team America, another film, they did a lot of music in that. You know, Spinal Tap, A Mighty Wind. These are all movies that music is a core part of it, because I just find music comedy very funny. And I think that this movie was a big part of that as well. So yeah, still find it funny to this day. Still love Weird Al Yankovic. I'm actually seeing him 5 different times on tour this year, on his tour, 5 different shows. So I'm still a big fan of his. And yeah, this movie is still one of my favorite comedies, but then also is a very important part of why I feel like I find certain things funny today.
That's awesome. Well, I didn't even know that he was still alive, so that's good to know.
Oh yeah, no, he's alive. He's had he had his first #1 album a couple years back, and he's almost bigger than ever. It's actually amazing of how every generation of kids, he finds a way, at least in the US, like a way into being like their favorite guy for a period of time. It's almost like a rite of passage. You go through this Weird Al phase as a kid. And just he's able to have that staying power is just phenomenal.
That's amazing. So I had heard of this name, but I never watched or heard anything of his until watching this movie. So I'm very glad that you put this on the list. I mean, I can so picture it that if I had gotten into this person, say at our age when you were,
at like 8,
this would have stuck with me for sure. It's kind of a different kind of experience, you know, getting to this at age 40,
right?
Because it is very goofy, it is very dumb. I will say though that I was not bored at all. I was invested. There is something about going back to my thing of sort of the truth behind what the character is trying to seek. There's something about that aspect that comes across, and maybe it's the music, maybe it's his hair, who knows? There's a lot at play. And I think that kept me very invested in his journey, and, you know, the janitor and everybody who's sort of around him. I don't know if I laughed out loud, but I think that has to do a lot with when are you meeting this person in your life?
Right.
You know, that said, it was super clever. All the gags and parodies, not all of them landed on me because they're obviously referencing shows and such from a time that I was not watching those shows, but a lot of those did make sense to me. So yeah, I'm actually now excited to watch more of his stuff or listen to his stuff, because this is my first intro, but I'm very glad that I watched it.
Yeah, no, I never really thought about this as if I were to introduce someone to Weird Al Yankovic, would this be the first thing that they see? Because if you haven't even heard of any of his famous like parody songs, that's interesting. Curious now, or that was very interesting to me to hear what you were saying in terms of how he landed with you as a comedic personality. And I think this movie perfectly exemplifies that. So, you know, I don't think this movie is a misnomer in terms of what you get out of his music. Like him as an artist, he expresses himself in a similar way through his music and his in his stage show and the different TV shows that he's been on too. But it must be it definitely is a movie that as a kid lands really well, and it's hard for me to understand how it would look like if I had only seen this movie at 40 and not at 8 and then dozens of times after it. But I'm glad you were engaged and found his character charming.
Yeah, and there's kind of a sweetness to him, you know, which is very endearing. And even though silly things are happening to him and he's doing silly things as well. And they're cringeworthy moments and all of that. But there's something sweet, which I think is important to your point on, not making humor at the expense of others, but there's also something to be said about the person who is making the humor. What is their mental makeup?
Right.
And I don't know, I gravitate towards people who are doing silly things, who are also sweet, as opposed to, mean spirited or sharp. And there's a place for that. I'm all for dark comedy as well. But yeah, there's something sweet about him.
Yeah, he has this innocence and childlike wonder to him that is very endearing. It's very endearing, no matter, even though how dumb some of the humor might be around that. I do find it very endearing, unlike, some of the mean-spirited sort of like Farrelly Brothers films don't really take to me. I had a very big issue with Bridesmaids, the film that came out maybe like 10 years ago, as just being very mean-spirited, where the humor is not coming from a good place. And I think a lot of that goes down to, like you were saying, the personalities of Weird Al, just like he's basically a kid. He has that same mentality as an innocent kid, and that's how he looks at the world, and that's what the humor comes from. And that is something that I gravitate towards a lot. It just makes me feel good, like that childlike wonder comes back in his gags and in his comedy.
Yeah, I have a different take on Bridesmaids, but we'll save that for another podcast.
Okay, sure. Okay, why don't we move on to the number 2 for you then?
All right, so my number 2 is Radio Days from 1987, directed by Woody Allen, starring Mia Farrow, Diane Wiest, Mike Starr. Gosh, what is the kid's name? I'm forgetting the main guy who plays him.
Seth Green.
Yep. So this, the log line, sorry, I should read that just for folks who have not watched this movie. But it's a little bit of an autobiographical movie of sorts on Woody Allen's life. But logline says, a nostalgic look at radio's golden age, focusing on one ordinary family and the various performers in the medium and in their lives. So I put this movie on the list, kind of referencing to what I was saying earlier about how humor is sort of part of day-to-day life. And it's humor and laughter is in the mundane things that you do every day. And there's something about that quality that is captured so beautifully in this movie. And there's like a long lineage of movies of this kind that I love, from Albert Brooks to Mel Brooks, well, not so much Mel Brooks, but Albert Brooks, Noah Baumbach to some degree, Greta Gerwig, even Mike Nichols movies. But I think it all traces back for me to Woody Allen movies, because there is sort of this borderline thing of nervous wreck, paranoia, self-doubt, self-deprecation, but also something that's very real and mundane. Like the stakes are pretty low, but it just somehow feels very day-to-day. And I really gravitate towards that kind of humor. There are set pieces, but they are, again, very rooted in reality. So, and this is probably my favorite Woody Allen film for those reasons. I mean, there are other more sort of everlasting or perhaps more brilliant films or earth-shattering movies in terms of what they achieve, like Annie Hall and such. But I don't know, this is a movie that I watch the most often that he's made, probably also because he's not in it himself, which helps. Right. But I think a couple of things to kind of highlight here, which is, first of all, I think it's a very brilliant storytelling device of using radio programs and setting that in a certain time, because you can sort of go in and out of various radio stories that are happening in your life as you're listening to those programs, but also the stories that are being depicted in the radio program. So there's just such a great canvas that's offered and available. And I think he taps into it so beautifully. There's so many movies of this kind, like including French Dispatch from last year, which I really like, but it's too dense to actually parse this kind of anthology movie. And I think this is the way to do an anthology movie in my mind, where you weave in the anthology with sort of the storytelling device. But to highlight a few things, there's a great sort of tragic arc that's happening here of multiple people, some trending up and some trending down. So Diane V's character, Aunt B, who has this kind of through line of just being this tragic person who's always trying to find love. Mia Farrow's character, who's like a nobody and sort of scales to being somebody. And through these two arcs, you're seeing it from the point of view of this child who's looking at both of these people, and just mundane, silly things are happening in their family all along. And I don't know, I just find that super endearing. I love the juxtaposition of the sad moments and the funny moments, because that's again how life is. Like, this is one episode where they're listening to a program where this girl has fell into a well, and right before that moment, the whole house is in like a total ruckus because, the little boy has done something wrong. The father is running around him to beat him up, and it's sort of, high energy and such. And then you cut to the radio program of the girl having fallen in the well. Then you find out that she's actually dead. And then you suddenly see the father is holding the son so tight because he's appreciative and just grateful that I have this great child in my life. Mm-hmm. And then right after that, they are off to something super silly and funny with the fish in the house, or the relatives during a Jewish holiday, one of them sort of going to the neighbor and eating all the stuff that you're not supposed to eat as a Jew. And that it's all happening within, a course of hours, which is, again, how life is. And I just love how the laughter and the sadness is kind of all woven through it. I don't think my childhood was anything like this, but in many ways, I don't know, when I watch this movie, I'm reminded of my own childhood, of just sitting around, eating stuff, making fun of each other, putting on a new album, dancing to it, literally me and my sister and my mother running around the house, making dance moves to whatever new song that's come out. So I don't know. This movie is sort of very close to my heart because it feels a little bit like my own growing up, which had a lot of joy and laughter, not specifically laugh out loud moments, mm-hmm. some, mm-hmm. but to me, this is about just the everyday funny moments of life. So yeah, that's Radio Days, number 2.
So you said this is your favorite Woody Allen movie. When did you see this? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Was this early on in discovering Woody or
later? I would say I watched this maybe 10 years ago.
Oh, okay.
For the first time. I'd seen, the classics,
mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
was sort of going down the rabbit hole to seek out more of his works. And I was like, oh, this is like, it sort of hits the perfect note for me.
Interesting. Yeah. So I had never seen this movie before. I'll probably sound like a broken record over time to the listeners, but I have to always caveat, not a Woody Allen fan, never been
mm-hmm.
a Woody Allen fan, not because of his personal life, putting that aside. Right. As a comedian and an artist and a filmmaker, I've just never really liked him. So I've only seen the ones that you have to see, like Annie Hall, Manhattan, right. Bananas, like that, the bigger ones. So this is one that I had heard of, but had never seen. And I think I had the same reaction that you did in terms of the type of humor that this is. I sort of was trying to vocalize it as like folksy nostalgia humor, where it's sort of basically just old tales that then you tell and then they're funny. It reminded me a lot of a speaking of radio, like a radio program that my parents used to listen to that I just did not like at all, called Prairie Home Companion. It's Garrison Keillor, who's like this public radio personality, but a lot of the same stuff. It's just stories that are then supposed to somehow be funny, that I just never found funny. And like this movie, I thought was a capsulation of that type of humor that just never landed with me. I don't know why. It just was never something that like I found the whimsy and the folks of it. I was like, I don't know. I just don't find it funny. Though I will say that I did laugh at one line that Larry David is in this movie, who I'm a big fan of Larry David. I was like, that line, he has one line in the film, his face isn't even in it. And I'm like, I literally laughed and like, wow, that voice sounded kind of familiar. And then I like Googled it and he ended up being in it. It's when you referenced this earlier, when the father goes over to a neighbor's house to tell them to turn down the music because it's I don't remember if it was a Jewish high holiday or just the Sabbath and you're not supposed to touch any electronics. And the neighbors were like communists and it's like, oh, the communists, go over and tell them to turn the music off. And he goes over there and you can just hear Larry David, because the guy's trying to explain, oh, it's a Sabbath, you're not supposed to do any work. And Larry David, who's like the communist, I'm not going to do the joke justice at all, but he was like, it's like, not do any work. You should always be working for your fellow man, because he's a communist. And I literally laughed for like 5 minutes at that. I'm like, that is really funny. So that was the only time I laughed at the film. I also found it was kind of distracting that Marge Simpson's voice is in this. And she's the mom, and she plays Marge Simpson on The Simpsons. And I could not every time she was on screen, I'm like, oh my God, like it's Marge Simpson. And she sounds exactly the same. It's not like she's putting a voice on The Simpsons. So I was like, whoa, this is like very weird seeing her,
that would be very distracting.
It was getting distracting.
I haven't watched too much of Simpsons, so that doesn't strike me. But oh gosh, that would ruin it for me.
I'm not even like a big Simpsons fan either, but it's just like that's so much in the zeitgeist. But like with the film overall, I do think it is a perfect expression of that genre, that like folksy humor, whimsical humor genre. And it did, the ending of the movie did actually affect me. I thought it was quite sad. I mean, I kind of took away the message of this film as like, we're taking you back to a time that does not exist. And all these people and all these players, the radio as a comedic art form was such a big thing, maybe for Woody Allen growing up, and definitely for the character in this film. And this movie came out in the 80s after, radio was definitely supplanted by television. And now that's even been supplanted, I feel like, by YouTube and the internet in terms of where people get their comedy. And there's sort of this message of like, these people are forgotten. And he's trying to like say, no, let's remember these people that are now completely forgotten by time. And I was even thinking in a meta sense, like this movie too, with it not being one of his major works, with Woody Allen becoming more problematic over time for various reasons, this film is almost going to be, in a sense, kind of forgotten. And it felt sad. It's like, as we're all going to be forgotten in a way. Yeah. I'm not to make our humor episode a little bit sad, but it's like, everything returns to dust in the end. And I felt, that was what all of a sudden got me in this movie, the very like last 5 minutes when he sort of makes that point, which I think the movie was trying to say that the whole time. Then right at the end, he's like, oh, and I just want to, send these people off who are now going to be forgotten forever. Because that's just the way that time goes. And I was thinking, wow, yeah, like this movie will be forgotten at some point. We'll be forgotten. Maybe our podcast will live on forever. Who knows? Maybe in 3,000 years, people will be listening to this. But yeah, I thought that was poignant. I will say like that actually kind of affected me emotionally. But yeah, overall, this movie had one laugh and I didn't really take to it very much, but it wasn't boring. It just wasn't my type of humor. Like we're talking about subjective humor before. Definitely, like, this was like an example of a humor that I, just doesn't speak to me. But I'm glad I saw it.
I'm not surprised. Yeah, I would not picture you laughing. And to be fair, like I don't really laugh with this movie, but it's sort of more in the comfort food kind of category for me. But I have like a smile on my face. And every once in a while, I'd sort of the smile might become wider or I might laugh out loud. That's sort of what happens. But I've seen it a couple of times now, or more than a couple of times. And it's funny about the ending. That's one takeaway from it for sure, what you said. To me, the takeaway is also, because I don't know, I am a bit of a nostalgic person, like nostalgia does work on me. So to me, it lands in a different poignant way, which is to remember the simpler times, if you will. The time that I was talking about, me and my sister and my mom running around at home. When I think about that, I'm transported to a joyous place instantly, which is not to say that you don't look ahead. You shouldn't, I'm not saying hang on to the past, but I don't know. I do believe that you can bring joy and laughter to your life by just commemorating and recognizing the happy times that you had in the past. I don't know, that does work on me.
Yeah. That's nostalgia. Definitely, this whole film was a nostalgia play for Woody Allen. It seemed like going back to his youth and highlighting something that no longer exists. And maybe for me, I latched on more to that of like, it worked for him because he lived through the radio days, title of the film. I mean, I did not grow up at all listening to radio, was not a child at the time that he was. But so it made me did think about my own, like you were saying, sort of my own childhood, even though that's gone and you can never get it back. And all you have is the memories. And when you pass on, then those are even gone. which is
Exactly.
kind of the darker tone that I got from the very end of the movie. But it did, I was like, wow, like that actually affected me. Cause it was funny throughout the whole rest of the film. Like, I don't care about this. Like, I don't have nostalgia for this. Like, so nothing, all this rings hollow. And then once I realized in the very end, it's like, oh, he's just making a meta point of like, yeah, this is his nostalgia, isn't yours, but you have your own. Everyone's got their own. And that is like, oh wow, okay, now, okay, I get what he's trying to say.
Yeah. Like to me, it was like, every time a new audio cassette tape, we're talking about audio cassette tapes, would release of like a favorite song, it was me and my mom and my sister going to the audio cassette store, buying the new audio cassette, the shinily packed thing, big smiles. That's all I wanted to buy. I had no other needs and demands. I just wanted the latest audio cassette track or whatever new movie soundtrack or whatever had come out, coming back, putting that on the entire afternoon, listening to it on repeat multiple times while snacks are being brought out or what have you. I don't know. It just takes me back to like a really happy place. And I think this movie does that to me.
Nice. So your movie would be called Cassette Days. Basically. If you were doing this. Nice. Cool.
All right. What's your next?
So my number 2 movie that shaped my sense of humor is 1964's Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. And this movie, directed by Stanley Kubrick, starring Peter Sellers in 2 roles, George C. Scott and Slim Pickens. The IMDb plot summary is: an insane American general orders a bombing attack on the Soviet Union, triggering a path to nuclear holocaust that a war room full of politicians and generals frantically tries to stop. So that logline actually could have been from a thriller. But this movie is a comedy. And when I first saw this film, I was pretty young. I don't remember exactly when I saw it. It was definitely before I knew who Stanley Kubrick was, who's now my favorite director. And it was the first time I remember seeing a movie that I was told it was a comedy. I think my dad was the one who showed, oh, you should watch this. It's a famous comedy. And I'm like, I was watching this, like, how is this a comedy? Like, it was my first exposure to kind of satire and this dark humor, and this realization that comedy isn't just like UHF movie that I mentioned earlier with people falling down or getting sprayed in the face or, getting their finger cut off and blood flying everywhere. It can say really important things. So that was the first thing that really like surprised me about this. And it actually is very funny. Like, as there are definitely bits in this film that are genuinely funny, but it does have a dark edge, and it's that satirical edge that really influenced me a lot. And a lot of the humor that I like is humor that deals with very important and major topics. It's kind of interesting too. This film was based on a book that was a very straight-laced thriller about what would happen if, in a nuclear holocaust.
Really? Wow.
And this book was adapted, and Kubrick and his screenwriters, decided to turn it into a comedy. But no one remembers the book. Like, that thing is completely forgotten. But this movie lives on even now, even though, hopefully we don't live under as much of a threat of nuclear war as they did in 64. But, it still resonates. And I think that, to me, when I realized that, I was like, wow, so this shows really the power of comedy. Like, you're making a very important statement about humanity, about the systems of power. Something else that I thought this movie does a great job in that also influenced me a lot too was the making fun of authority. Like, there's no authority figure in this movie that's not like a bumbling idiot and who's not really silly. And it shows to me that you might think, oh, this is the president, like, we must trust him, or these are the generals, they're very smart, they know what they're doing. In actuality, they know nothing, and that they're just as much of buffoons as anyone else. And in fact, the most like kind of straight-laced, kind of by the books people are the infantrymen, or not infantry, the soldiers that are flying in these bombers, and they're just carrying out their mission, which also then does make you think about like what, it's a mission, but a mission to destroy the world, and how they can go about it in such a straight-laced way and just a matter-of-fact way. There's definitely a lot of humor and also commentary in that. Yeah, so for me, those are definitely the biggest takeaways of the importance of comedy, and in terms of what it can say and what it can do while still being funny. And then also that the authority figures are the ones to be mocked, that we should be mocking and making fun of these authority figures, saying the emperor has no clothes, calling them out on that, and using humor to do it is a much more effective way than anyone else. And there's a lot of layers to this film. We could dissect it in many different ways, but I wanted to kind of take one piece out of it, which was the comedy element, and talk about that and how important that was to me. And again, I still watch this movie now and in a way find it more funny because I'm older and have seen some of these systems that this movie mocks, and see the ridiculousness in them a lot more as you grow up, and really see that, yeah, not only are these people dumb, but a lot of these whole systems that they've designed actually are pretty silly too. I mean, the whole crux of this film is a system that got designed where if a bomb was dropped, then all of a sudden all the bombs are just going to go off. And it was designed by the Russians as a fail-safe mechanism. And yeah, it might make sense on paper, but if you really think about it, it's absolutely ludicrous. And I think that's what this movie does such a good job in conveying, and something that definitely affected me in not only the types of humor that I gravitate towards now, but just even like politically and how I think about society and authority. I think this movie was a big influence on me there too. So yeah, again, a lot more I could say about this, but I want to keep it just to the comedy element. So just a great film, and still really holds up, I feel.
Yeah, it totally does. I'm so glad you put this on the list, and I kind of had a feeling that you would. I'd never watched this movie before, and I'd always wanted to watch it, so I'm very glad that I finally watched it.
Yeah.
I think I said this at the top, which is I find satire very engaging and it pulls me in, but I can't laugh. There are moments in this movie that are definitely, I laugh because they're clever, but there's something about, because good satire is very real.
Right.
I find it hard to escape from the reality. That said, though, if this movie was done as a non-satire or as a thriller, like you said, I don't think I would be as engaged in it. I mean, I might be, but in a very different kind of way. I'll be engaged in it in a cerebral way. Versus, I think what dark humor does in this kind of a setup is that it exposes, like you said, the craziness and idiocy of people and systems.
Right.
And that's the part that gets really highlighted, which would not be the case if you made this as a thriller. You would be concerned with other things. And that's the power of the movie. So yeah, it's brilliantly made in every technical department, acted beautifully by everybody. It really pulls you in. It stayed with me for days after. Maybe if I watch it, more and more number of times, maybe I'll laugh at it or laugh with it. But on first viewing, it's too real. And how I react to all satire in general. And that's why I think I was happy to see To Be or Not to Be in this one on both of our lists. I can get into the farcicalness of To Be or Not to Be because it's kind of handled with that light touch that I was talking about, which gives me enough of a distance and escape from the reality that I can actually laugh with it. This sort of feels too in it for me to actually laugh. So, but I get it. This is funny, and I'm all for calling bullshit, and I'm all for calling out authorities, as you very well know. We have similar sensibilities in that regard, but yeah, this is not funny to me.
Oh, interesting.
This is very engaging and pulls me in.
Yeah, like I feel that it's definitely a fine line that I feel it kind of walks well. Of you are laughing along with it. And maybe it's easier for me to say that now. Again, this wasn't 1964 when I saw the movie. Actually, similarly To Be or Not to Be, actually, this movie was made when this could have happened.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union was there. Bombs were ready on either side. U.S. could have done it. Soviet Union could have done it. But they made this movie at a time when it probably was pretty unsettling for the people in the audience. Easier for us to watch now, where it's not as much of an issue as it was. But it's like, for me, kind of like what you were saying too about the thriller aspect of it. It just like, you wouldn't catch the fact that the premise of nuclear war in and of itself is kind of funny if you really think about it. And I think that's what this movie walks so well, especially the end when the whole world blows up. And they play the We Will Meet Again song on top of that is just, I laugh at that. But I get also why it's hard to It's a tough needle to thread, and if satire is not something that is usually in your cup, is your cup of tea, that at least you liked it, and you found the movie to work. Even on a technical level, like Ken Adam, who did the production design, that War Room set is one of the best sets I think I've ever seen in anything.
And just cinematography, right?
Amazing.
Like where the camera is positioned, how the whole thing is lit up. It's just brilliant. Yeah. I mean, of course, it's Kubrick, and he, gets the best people. So,
yeah, no, he does. Cool. Okay. Well, I think we're now to your number one movie that shaped your sense of humor.
All right. So my number one is The Birdcage from '96, directed by Mike Nichols, starring Robin Williams, Nathan Lane, Gene Hackman, Diane Wiest. 2 Diane Wiest movies on my list. I just realized that.
Interesting.
But a quick log line: a gay cabaret owner and his drag queen companion agreed to put a false straight front so that their son can introduce them to his fiance's right-wing moralistic parents. So this is sort of my kind of laugh out loud movie, I would say. And I think, to me, this is like, I've been talking a lot about, humor being rooted in reality, the day-to-day, or even the bad times. It's still very much rooted in reality. So for sure, otherwise it would not be funny to me, but it's definitely camp. It's definitely heightened. But I think the reason why it's funny is because it is rooted in reality. I think there's a great amount of world building that happens here with so much of detail, where you have the heightened gay reality of a drag club and the people who operate in this area where apparently everybody wears a thong, no matter what. I've never seen this much thong on.
It's Florida. That's what they do. It's Florida. That's their,
I would think,
state attire. Yeah,
exactly. So there's that, and then there's the heightened kind of reality of the right-wing Republican, which is Gene Hackman and Diane Wiest and that clan, and then the comedy is definitely in the craziness and idiocy of these people individually, but the comedy is really in when you bring these people together. I mean, that dinner scene, which goes on for a very long time, I think is one of the funniest scenes or parts of a movie ever. I've seen this movie a million times and I still laugh at it like crazy, even though it's very campy and heightened. But there's a strong emotional core at it, and I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing people who are different from each other. You're seeing people who are, looking for love. And there's something very real about that. They're fighting their own insecurities. In Nathan Lane's character, who's afraid of getting older and not being attractive anymore, or not being relevant anymore. The Robin Williams character, even though he set up this whole drag club, which apparently does pretty well, he still has sort of one foot in quote unquote classic masculinity and sort of struggles with what is it to be gay when you're maybe not stereotypically gay. What does that mean? And the same goes for the Republican right-wing people. They're still insecure. I mean, the whole box of chocolates detail is just so funny to me. Like, all Gene Hackman wants to do is eat chocolates when life gets tough. So I don't know. I just find this movie hilarious. But of course, it's Mike Nichols. So, it's not a shabbily done comedy camp movie. It's shot by Chivo, which is amazing. You see that from the first shot as to how the camera pans, into Florida. And there's just so many great details from the dinner table scene, how the camera is moving all over. It just is shot beautifully. The whole cast is amazing, except for the son, but I'll give him a pass. Everybody else is incredible. Elaine May wrote this movie. There are like a million one-liners in this movie that are just so funny to me. So yeah, this is sort of my sort of, if I'm in a bummed out mood and if I want to get out of it, this is the movie I put on. And there's something about, I don't know, dressing up weird, which is funny to me. It always has been. For the longest time in my life, I was kind of scared of drag queens because they felt very, I don't know, tall and sort of, I don't know, scary to
Imposing.
me. Yeah. And over time, I think my way into that has been, this is so ridiculous. And I think there's something about just the funniness that comes with dressing funny. There's a lot of great physical comedy humor, which is another one of my things that I really enjoy watching on screen. Not just in life. This is silly, but it's pretty funny when somebody trips over. I do find that funny.
A pratfall is classic.
Yeah.
Slip on a banana peel, fall down. Nothing funnier than seeing someone else fall down.
Exactly. So I think this movie has a lot of that imbued in it. So yeah, that's my number one, The Birdcage.
So I had seen this movie kind of in the 90s. Like it was on TV, a big Ron Williams fan. I remembered seeing it at some point, like in bits and pieces, in terms of never sat down and watched it. Right. I was like, yeah, I've seen The Birdcage. It's funny. Like, seen enough of it. And then I watched it for this. And it was, I'm trying to figure out a way to it was hard to watch.
Really?
Yeah. I found it very grim, like mean-spirited, and I just couldn't get over the setup being mean-spirited and just nasty. I found the entire movie very nasty. The son, I just could not get over what an evil kid this was, of like, my dad is gay. He's accepted it. The son, I think, has in the film, but he's asking his dad to hide who he is. And then also, they weren't married because gay marriage wasn't legal back then, but basically kick his husband, I'll call him husband, out of the house and shame him and say, I'm embarrassed of the person that you're in love with. I don't ever want to see this guy. Get him out of here. And you know what, Dad, I want you to lie and erase everything of who you are, which, they dove into his background a little bit. He struggled with coming out a little bit, and he seemed incredibly insecure and sad. Ron Williams' performance, it just left a wounded soul is what I got out of him for this entire film. And like the son is just like kicking him when he's down. And it just, I couldn't get over that. And the film letting the son win in the end, like he gets the girl, he gets married. It even ends with a freeze frame of like him smiling. It's like the villain just won. And I could not get over that. Yes, there were also a lot of really like problematic and dated moments with like Hank Azaria, who, he's kind of like the Rob Schneider, where like every character he's done in his entire career, like should have got him canceled at any time. In this film, he plays an incredibly like effeminate Hispanic, even though he is not gay, nor is he Hispanic at all. And so, there were a lot of problematic elements that I could sort of like look beyond, just because it did come out, in the mid 90s. But I had a really, really hard time with this movie. It actually like affected me for days afterwards. It shook me to the Robin Williams core. I literally was like, is this guy even funny? Like it, and who's one of my favorite comedic actors? And it really did shook me. It was an experience. I will say that, I researched, what is this? Where did this movie come from? Okay, it's a play that was written in France in the early 70s. I'm like, okay, well, maybe that could have landed then in that context. But I had a really hard time with this movie. Actually, the only laughs I found, I think Gene Hackman's character was actually very funny. He was the only one that I felt had a heart, actually. It's like his, he's not supposed to be. He's like the bigoted, Republican, like you mentioned, who's against gay marriage. But I got from him, and maybe it's just the performance of the fact that I like Gene Hackman. It's like he was only doing that for votes. Like he had a kind heart. He didn't, which, I'm not saying I'm defending people that support bad policy, even though they don't believe in it themselves. But there was something about his character that I sort of like. In the beginning of the film, they were cutting between the Miami stuff with Nathan Lane and Ron Williams, and then the Gene Hackman bits where he's dealing with his running mate, he's going to run for president. His running mate was just caught in some sex scandal, like him dealing with that. And I'm like, I just want to see that movie. Like that movie's funny and like kind of warm-hearted. And this other movie is just very depressing and dark and grim and just nasty. And all the people I just really had a hard time with this. And I was trying to think too, like what the lesson that we were supposed to get out of this. Like, did anyone learn anything in the message of the movie? Like I was struggling with that because it had such a visceral like impact from having watched this. It was like getting hit by a train. It was crazy. But I'm glad I saw it, because again, like I would have told you, I've seen this before and it was funny. because I watched bits and pieces of it in the 90s. But yeah, this was a tough one. So maybe you can help me. Like, what do you think the message? Like, did anyone learn anything you think in the movie? And like, what was the message of the movie that you take away from it? Because I was just trying to find like what that was supposed to be, and maybe help me understand like what the filmmakers were trying to say, I guess, with this.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say I'm not surprised by that reaction, because there is definitely a way to look at this movie where that part sort of just hits you. And that's why I said, even in my description, that the son is problem.
Bad guy, really bad guy.
Really awful guy. And I wish they had imbued a little bit more humanity. And it's also a really bad performance, because, I get it. He's a 20-year-old, kids are selfish, they don't really know better and what have you, but I think it's played really poorly, where everything he's doing comes off as really mean-spirited and sort of serious, as opposed to a kid who doesn't know what they're doing and they still have a good heart, so that part is a big failure of the movie. But I don't know, maybe I've just watched this movie so many times that I've just ignored him. I just don't pay attention to him. I'm just concerned with the rest of it all, because if you remove him, the rest of it is pretty funny to me, the way it's done. Problematic in many ways, for sure. But then I'm also reminded of the time where this movie was made, right? Like, this is still the 90s. And I know. The fact that this is like a mainstream movie directed by an Oscar-winning director with this cast. It is an achievement for its time, for sure. Of course, if you look at it now, this is like, oh my gosh, this is like full of problems. So I give it a little bit of that too. But going back to your question of the message, I think to me, the message is that these people who are supposedly very different on the surface of it, you would never even see them in the same room. Here they are, they've gone through this entire night of dealing with each other and frankly exposing things of each other that were actually not true. Like you said, like Gene Hackman is probably not bigoted. And maybe there's some things that even Nathan Lane's character is trying to sort of emote, that he does believe in sort of the quote unquote sort of maternal, simpler life of man and woman building a home, what have you. There are elements. So to me, the message is that people might be very different on the surface, but they're still more alike than different. So that's one.
Okay.
And then number two is sort of the grand, sort of the finale of, the guys, the Republicans who are so supposedly polar opposite, at the end of the movie walk out in drag. And the way that they all work together to make that happen, to me, is sort of the cherry on the cake. That if you talk to each other and see each other and see past your differences and see the commonalities, you can join hands and make something work. Now, what they're trying to make work is the marriage of these two idiots. So, that's probably not the best outcome. So, but if you don't, I don't focus on that outcome. Whenever I watch this movie, I actually never get to the wedding. I just shut it when they walk out of the drag club. Because to me, that is the end of the movie, that these people who are so different join hands and created this moment together. And in a way, comedy and humor is a part of them getting to that place, because being in drag is sort of funny to begin with, So that's the message to me.
Okay.
The final outcome is not the marriage. Nobody cares.
I just had a really hard time with this. But I slogged through it and then had to do a bunch of little Robin Williams chasers to remind myself that this guy can be funny and is a good comedic actor. I just stuffed myself with a bunch of Robin Williams movies to be like, oh yeah, no, this guy is, he's funny and warm and sweet. But again, I'm glad I actually sat down and watched this movie. Even though, now I have a campaign to get it banned off of HBO Max. But no, I'm just kidding. But no, it's I'm definitely glad that I saw this. Just interesting to kind of go back to a movie that was, again, like you said, in the mid 90s was a huge commercial, critical, like across the board, like a very known and famous film. So it was very well received back then. I just had a hard time with it now, but yeah, glad I saw it. Definitely glad I saw it.
All right, what's your number one?
Okay, so my number one film is not Monty Python and the Holy Grail from 1975. So this movie was directed by Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones, which are two members of the Monty Python comedy troupe, and it stars the rest of the Monty Python comedy troupe. The logline on IMDb is King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table embark on a surreal, low-budget search for the Holy Grail, encountering many very silly obstacles. So this movie for me was an easy number one. This impacted my sense of humor more than really anything else. Definitely any other movie. Got me into absurd, wry, witty humor, very dialogue driven humor, very subversive as well. And I am a huge fan of British humor, and it can be traced back to my love of this film. Like now, most of my favorite TV shows that are comedies are all out of the UK. A lot of my favorite movies, comedic movies, all come from also the UK. This movie got me into Monty Python and a lot of other, older British comedy shows. And for some reason, I've always been identified with that type of humor, and in a much of the way that I just described it in terms of what British humor is. So it can be silly and dumb, but also there's that layer of smartness and commentary. The other thing I love about this film too is how it's also like making fun of the film itself. There's like this meta commentary on it. The opening credit sequence, they're playing the credits and then they have subtitles, Swedish subtitles, and then they apologize for that. And they're, oh, we fired the people who made the subtitles. We fired the people that did the credits. It's like there's this meta commentary going on throughout the entire film. And even at the end, the movie ends because the cast gets arrested for one of the cast members killing somebody else on screen. So it's that very irreverent, kind of like fourth wall breaking experience is a humor that now I also really like in terms of how meta it is. And, Monty Python has influence over so many different types of, different shows and movies. And I've grown to love those shows that are very influenced by them, like a South Park, a Rick and Morty, Mitchell and Webb Look. Like there's all these shows that I like that they're all point to Monty Python as their heroes. And I think that's also then now why, this movie to me was the one that kind of got me on that path. So yeah, I mean, much like UHF too, there was definitely it's a very quotable movie. So there was a cachet in high school and junior high about the people that could quote Monty Python and know Monty Python. And yeah, there's also kind of a bit of like a clickiness and a snootiness about that too. Like, oh, you're not into Python. And yeah, I'll admit I was one of those people. But that cult humor too, much like UHF, that was a big part of my kind of gravitating towards that type of humor. And this movie was, like I said, a big part of that. So I watched it again for this part. I hadn't seen it in a very long time because I haven't been watching comedies very often. But another movie that the second I put it on, I just watched it 3 more times because I'm like, I'm laughing. Wow. I can't stop laughing at this. And it's still funny to me in the same way it was back when I first saw it when I was, probably 12, 13, was exposed to this just on TV, and then friends just coin it all the time. So I'm like, I should probably watch what this is. And I still find it funny today. So yeah, this one had to be the number one for me. If simply just for the British comedy angle, that is how I for sure would define my humor. If I had to put it in a category, it'd definitely be British humor. So had to be number one.
Yeah. I was glad that you put this on the list because I had never watched this movie, and frankly, I have not watched anything on Monty
Python. Yeah,
so clearly, I would not be a part of your
clique. Yeah,
I'll be like, thank you very much.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you can go off with the cool kids, and we're like the nerds in the corner quoting Monty Python. Yeah,
maybe. But yeah, I think you were a better man than I was in at least sitting through the Birdcage. I could only watch 15 minutes of this movie.
15 minutes?
That's all.
Really?
Maybe I need to get back to it on a different day.
Yeah.
Because I love British movies and I definitely associate myself with that kind of humor. But I think there's another layer of silliness and maybe the medieval setting, which is also not my thing at all. there's something about those costumes that maybe that's why I've never watched this movie, because I must have seen posters. I'm like, oh, hell no, never watching this,
Yeah.
or maybe in 20 years. So I don't know. This was too silly for me. And maybe again, it's sort of, at what point in your life are you getting to this? Maybe if
that could
I'd
be it.
gotten to this, earlier in my life and sort of grown up with it, probably this would have stayed with me and I would have just seen more and more layers, like you're saying. But now it's sort of, I'm only meeting this movie at a surface.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just too silly for me. Or maybe I just watched it on a bad day. Who knows?
Or watched only 15 minutes of it. But
or that I should have moved past it. Just didn't have the courage to go further.
Yeah. No, I mean, I suffered through the Birdcage. So
I know.
I think that movie, I was depressed for about 3 to 4 days after watching that. It was that hard of a slog for me. Like a piece of my soul got taken away after watching that. So you can get through Monty Python. It's like 90 minutes. But had you not seen, so you haven't seen like Life of Brian or any of the show at all?
No.
Any of the skits?
No.
Just on YouTube or something? Oh, interesting.
Never seen anything of theirs.
Were they not popular like in India? I just was surprised just with a lot of the British influence that this wouldn't be something that was like floating around a lot. Oh, interesting.
Maybe it was, but somehow it never entered my home. Like, there's definitely Mr. Bean and, a lot of that sort of stuff that was in my household, but for whatever reason, not this. So I don't know, I guess blame it on my parents, why this was not in my house. But yeah, I don't know. It's just too silly for me.
Interesting. Well, like we said at the beginning of the episode, humor is a very subjective thing. And I think we definitely found our, the point of, the definite, that encapsulates it so much just in our first two or both of our number ones. It definitely it's a perfect encapsulation of that.
Yeah, because there's more overlap that we had in our, 3s and 2s, versus our number ones are definitely, polar opposite. And, I also think there's subjectivity to humor, but humor also is all about, like you said, you have not watched a funny movie in a while because you just haven't been in the headspace. I think there's a lot of that at play here as well, where humor can land on you in weird ways if you're not in the right headspace.
That's true.
So I don't know, maybe on a different day, the Birdcage or Monty Python land differently, or how, maybe not the Birdcage.
Not the Birdcage. I don't think I can stomach that movie again.
Probably not.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm not planning on watching Monty Python in anytime soon either.
Yeah.
But I do want to give Monty Python another shot though at some later point, because they're iconic, and a lot of the stuff that I love that came out of that country, I know it sort of owes it to this. So for that reason alone, I feel like I should give it another shot. So
yeah, maybe Life of Brian is a better one for you to swallow, which many think is a better film.
Okay.
But I saw Grail first and actually find it funnier, even though Life of Brian is saying a lot more important things just about religion, society. It's definitely more of a message movie in this one. But I think this was a good. I like that our number ones kind of went back to that thesis about how just, again, personal humor is, and it is, I think, one of the most personal things that exists in terms of tastes in genres. People either love or, like horror, for example, right? You either love it or you hate it. And you might, have specific flavors in it, but everyone loves to laugh. So everyone has a type of comedy that they like. And it just really depends on the individual and their life experience and what they find funny. And you can't describe it to the other person either. Like I couldn't, if we sat down and we watched Birdcage together, I don't think you could explain why I would laugh at something. It's just not something you can do. I mean, academically, you can study humor and definitely be very objective about it in that sense of destruction of a joke. But to try to explain why something's funny or to help someone explain the joke so that they laugh, you can't do it. It's just something about the person.
No, absolutely. And like we said before too, I think timing matters a lot. There's a reason why they say comedic timing, but there's a meta-ness to it that when you're meeting something in your life and in your day-to-day, really, has a lot to do with how something will land on you.
Yeah. And the context too. I mean, I think the thing that's interesting about, or at least two of my choices, UHF and Holy Grail. Now, I've watched those movies with my friends before, but it was something where I watched it on my own, but then we could talk about it and redo the jokes. So there's like that social aspect.
Right.
Seeing a comedy alone is something that, without other people laughing around you, you look at it a little bit differently, I feel like. So that I think plays into it for sure. Like you said about sense of place, right? You see a big comedy in the theater opening night, everyone's laughing. And then sometimes I'll laugh a lot too. And then afterwards, like, that movie kind of sucked. I don't know why I thought that was so funny, but it was just the context of what was going on in the audience. Or maybe you see it with a friend who, like, it's their funny, that, the funniest movie to them. So they're laughing throughout the whole thing. And it sort of like helps bring you along a little bit. So it definitely, that's a really good point you made about, it is a lot about timing and place when it comes to humor.
Yeah, because I'm remembering, I think I watched the Birdcage the first time with my mom and a bunch of other people.
A group setting.
They were really into it. It was a group setting, and it sort of has stayed with me. I saw people around me sort of falling off their chairs, laughing. And that has stayed with me, which is probably why I've sort of masked a lot of the things that I intellectually know are problematic or not good. I just omit them. They don't land on me anymore.
For sure. And with this and a lot of other humor too, this movie, but just humor in general, like there is a lot, humor can get dated in certain ways.
Right.
And kind of going back to like, well, at the time, this may or may not have been, found funny or acceptable. It's just that changes a lot too. Like humor does evolve over time, just in terms of the cultural zeitgeist as well. Where I just don't think this movie, if it came out today in the same way, would be as lauded as it was in the mid 90s. Would have been, it's a different time, which is fine. Like that doesn't mean that the movie then can't work if you see it now. I think humor can be outdated, but still be funny in the current form. I mean, hell, that To Be or Not to Be movie was from the 40s. And I literally, the first 15 minutes, I was like almost crying. I was laughing so hard. And I was like, this is so freaking funny. So I think that it can, also be outside of its time. But no, I think you're hitting on it a lot about sense of when you saw it, how you saw it, being a big factor. I mean, all the movies that I listed, I saw, for the first time before I was 11, 11, 12.
That's a huge deal. Exactly.
And I think that's a big part of why.
All of them at 40.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Cool.
All right.
Any didn't almost made it, like movies that you wanted to put on but didn't make it?
Yeah. I'm a big Steve Martin person, so that was a big toss up for me. And I had to put the Birdcage because it started with that for me, but a lot of sort of the physical comedy aspects and the buffoonery of Steve Martin, anything from House Sitter to The Jerk, all of that is very funny to me.
Yeah.
And then in the Radio Days vein, broadcast news, a lot of Noah Baumbach's movies that owe to that kind of sense of humor, which is sort of mundane day to day.
Yeah.
It's not laugh out loud, but just sort of life going by. So yeah, those would be some other picks.
Nice. Yeah, for me, I was Mallrats. I was really into Kevin Smith for a very long time, and I think that that movie captures a lot of his sensibilities. Basketball, which is like a Zucker Brothers film with the creators of South Park. Spinal Tap, which almost made it. I mean, that was very hard to not put that on this list for me. I think I watched that actually in preparation for this too, again 3 times, because I couldn't get over how funny this thing was. I couldn't stop watching it. Help, which is one of the Beatles films, Bottle Rocket from Wes Anderson, and then Pee-wee's Big Adventure and Beetlejuice. Both of those movies are, Tim Burton's comedies that really were a big part of my sense of humor as well. That were hard to leave those off the list too, but I think they're encapsulated a little bit in UHF. Both of why those movies were so important to me, just that irreverent, different humor. But yeah, cool. Well, this was, again, really fun doing this episode because I got to, I spent so much time watching comedies that I hadn't seen in so long and watched them multiple times. It was just really fun. And To Be or Not to Be, I was very glad I saw that. And I would definitely I want to watch more of his films now. And Carl Lombard too, to your point, she did just such a good job on that. I know she has a very short filmography because she passed away before her time, but I definitely want to dive more into that for sure. So thanks for putting that film on the list.
No, for sure. Yeah, Lubitsch is up there for me. Everything.
Yeah, no, I gotta watch more of the stuff.
So yeah, well, that's our episode. Thank you for listening and laughing with us, or maybe even at us.
Either way is fine. Yeah,
either way is fine. We'll take it, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, please subscribe, rate us, review us at wherever you listen to our podcast. And until next time, goodbye.
Later.